Hello, and thank you for checking out this message from Grace Church San Diego. If you've never been a slave, you might assume you are free, but the truth is that we are often in bondage to the many choices we make. God has a clear answer to this dilemma. You can truly be free and embrace your best life. The series Rescued will help you to understand step by step how you can secure true freedom. We'd love to hear how Grace Church is affecting your life. Please send an email to info@gracesd.com with your story. Or if you'd like to help support our ministry financially, you can visit the website below so we can continue to help people find Christ and become His mature followers.
So next week we're going to start talking about rescuing someone, an ocean rescue, and how lifeguards do that and so forth. But today, instead of dealing with that, I thought let's kind of imagine ourselves. So take just a moment, got to imagine that you are in the water and you're swimming just off the coast, not very far out, and you're swimming and all of a sudden you feel a rip current. How many have been in a rip current or rip tide before? Yeah, a few of you. So just picture yourself there and you're like, at first it's no big deal and you go, I got this, and you start swimming to shore and as you're swimming to shore, you make a little progress, and then you begin to realize you're not making that much progress. And as you swim harder and harder, and you realize you're actually getting farther away from the shore, now you begin to panic. And so you swim even harder. And now that you swim harder and panic has set in, you begin to extend a tremendous amount of energy, and now you're angry. And you're not only angry at the situation, you're angry at God. Now it's getting serious. Like, I could lose my life in this situation. Aren't you glad you came to church today? So, this is a serious dilemma now. How am I going to get out of this? And while you're swimming in, you look up the coast and you look down the coast and you see other swimmers are going in. And you're like, why me? They're going in with no problem. Am I that bad of a swimmer? And now panic turns to despair. And so in despair, we do what we always do, we pray. But we don't just pray, we like bargain pray. Like, God, let me tell you something, I'm in trouble here, and I just want you to know, if you get me out of this, I'm not going to serve you for the rest of my life. I'm going to serve you, and I will give more, and I will serve more. And God, let me just tell you, if you get me out of here, I'll even join the leadership team of the junior hires. And God, let me make it clear to you, nobody likes the junior hires. So that's me. I'm going to be that guy. So you're in a panic and you're in trouble. And you begin to wonder, how am I going to get out of this? Everybody suffers. Everybody gets into suffering. How do you deal with your suffering? Not everybody deals with suffering well. And so what I want to talk about is this whole matter of suffering, and that God has actually called us to learn to suffer well. So welcome to Grace Church. Glad you're here. That was a question. Glad you're here? Not so much. All right, whatever. Online campus, we're glad to have you with us. And if you need a Bible, would you raise your hand? Our ushers will come by with a Bible that you can use during the service and follow along with us. We're going to turn to 1 Peter chapter 5. That's toward the back of the Bible. If you get to Revelation, just kind of make a U-turn and come back a few books, and you'll be at 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 5. While they're turning or handing out the Bibles, let me just share with you that our vision statement is to build communities, safe communities, where imperfect people grow. That's kind of what we're about. And we want you to know you're safe here, and that is something that's important here. But as you may know, we are actually starting a new campus, and Lord willing, next month we will open up in East County. We're almost done. And as we do that, we want to reach more people. We want to help rescue people who need Jesus Christ, that maybe have problems in their life, that we can come alongside of them and share the love of God with them. And if you would like to be a part of that, in your program, there is a card that says Vision 2020. We would love for you to be a part of that. You can invest in that financially. We won't belabor that, but if you see that need, we do need to raise some more funds, and God is faithful and He uses us to meet those needs. So what's this whole matter of restoration and being rescued. And in the midst of suffering, actually God, by his grace, restores us. This concept of restored by grace. We all suffer. We all struggle. Some people struggle well and suffer well. Other people buckle under the pressure of their suffering. The answer is not found in the relief from suffering. The answer is actually found in a whole other matter of embracing truth and learning to submit to this. And it's in the issue of surrender. And it seems like that's not what I want. I don't want to learn to surrender to suffering. I just want the suffering to go away. I mean, that's where we're at, let's be honest. But God has a plan for you that is powerful. So as we said, everybody suffers, but not everybody suffers well. You really have two choices. The first choice is you can self-manage through resistance. And what I mean by that, when you're suffering, you're going to do everything in your power to get over that suffering. You're going to resist the suffering and say, I'm out. Just like in that water, you're in a riptide or a rip current, and you're going to do everything in your power to get out of that rip current, and you're going to make it to the shore. And if nobody believes in you, you believe in you until you run out of energy. Now you're in trouble. So that self-managed resistance. And the other option is surrendered abiding. I know that doesn't sound like fun. You're suffering and go, okay, I'm going to embrace the suffering. I'm just going to, not that you're going to enjoy it, but that you are actually going to abide in the suffering and be comfortable with this. Because I want to tell you a truth. When you are suffering, most times, you have nothing to say about when it stops. If it's some physical problem that has come on you, or financial problem, or emotional distress, when you go through something, you may not have the power of it. The case was with a woman named Jill that I knew years ago in a previous church I pastored in Northern California, in San Jose. And Jill was, towards the end of my ministry there, about a year and a half or so before, before I came here, she found out she had cancer. And it was a pretty serious form of cancer. And they did some surgery, and they started on chemotherapy. And while she's on this chemotherapy and going through all of the physical challenges of that and the suffering of that, the pain and all of that, unfortunate crisis happened in their family. Her husband was killed in a car accident. Well, they had a few children. And her husband was the only one that was working. And so that was the income for their house. And they were young, so he didn't have life insurance. And now they have, on top of everything else, the loss of her husband and dealing with this cancer. They're in financial trouble. And the last year and a half of being there and watching her, she was a young woman, and I watched as she began to show the signs of suffering in her face. It was just, and part of it was the cancer, and part of it was just the emotional distress. And we prayed for her, and we asked God to deliver her, and she asked God to deliver her, but it stayed there. Well, unfortunately, I left there and came here. 5 years after I came to this church, I went back to visit my old church, and I spoke there, and I saw her, and she looked amazing. And I went up to her, and I said, Jill, you look amazing. How are you doing? I figured she was cured from cancer or in remission or something. I said, so how's it going with your physical challenge with cancer? And she said, I still have it. I still have surgeries I have to go through. I've had more bouts of chemotherapy, rounds of chemotherapy, but I'm doing well. And I said, well, how are the finances? Finances are horrible. And I'm thinking, well, why do you look so good? People don't do that when they're suffering. And she said, I found something really important. And that was, I had to stop fighting the suffering and just accept that God was present. And God met me and began to comfort me and strengthen me in the midst of my suffering. You see, we think the only way we can get out is to resist the suffering, when in fact she found the key, and that is to abide, to surrender to it and abide in it, and really accept the powerful truth that James said in James chapter 1. He said, "Count it all joy," listen to this, "count it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter suffering." James is a knucklehead. Are you kidding me? Count it all joy, because he says, because you know this, you know that suffering produces faith, that produces steadfastness. The steadfastness literally means to abide in it, to have the ability to abide in it. And that steadfastness has its full effect when you are complete and you lack nothing. So it's not about the removal of the suffering. It's about power within the suffering and realizing God is doing something to grow me. And she got a hold of that concept, Jill did, and it transformed her life, and you could see it physically on her, and the joy was amazing. So you have a choice. How are you going to suffer? We all suffer. We all need to be rescued in our suffering, and sometimes we think the only kind of rescue we're going to get is if we're extricated from our suffering. But what if there was a different kind of rescue, and that we are rescued within our suffering? And that's what 1 Peter 5 talks about. And after you've suffered a little while, oh good, he's going to tell us we're going to stop suffering. He says, the God of all grace, notice that it's the God of all grace, the gracious God who is a gift giver. The word grace means a free gift, a gift-giving God who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. There is something powerful about this verse that, yes, we all suffer, but suffering is, we have options of how to deal with that. Let me share with you 6 things about suffering. Before I do, there's a quote at the top of your outline. It's from Helen Keller. And you probably know Helen Keller's story, deaf and blind, and went through a lot of difficult things in her life. But she wrote this: character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. I love that, because most of us never experienced what she went through. But the beauty of that is she saw the power in the suffering. And if you're going through something right now that is causing you emotional distress, you need to understand 6 things about suffering. Number 1, God is aware and cares about your suffering. Number 2, and by the way, if you're looking for these on the outline, they're not there. This is totally for free. Anything you give in the offering doesn't go to this, all right? And you're going, wait a minute, are we paying for the message? Like, I'm giving a nickel. That was a nickel message. Anyway, all right, here I are. Number 1, God is aware and cares about your suffering. Number 2, suffering is temporary. Number 3, suffering is not only physical and emotional pain, but often it is spiritual attack. As we find out in 1 Peter chapter 5, you'll find that out in just a moment. Number 4, suffering is degrading in its impact on life, and it impacts all 3 aspects of our lives: body, soul, and spirit. Suffering is degrading. Number 5, the only way out of degrading power of suffering is to abide with divine assistance in the midst of the suffering. And number 6, your rescue is first the rescue of your soul, long before the rescue of your physical need. God is more interested in your soul than he is in the things that you're going through physically or socially. It's a powerful thing to understand the unique nature of suffering, and what it does for us is actually a gift from God. He's the God of all grace who has called you to eternal glory. So one day, no matter what suffering you have in this life, one day, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you truly believe in Jesus Christ, one day you're going to be in heaven, and guess what? You will never suffer again. You will never have disease again. You'll never get old. Lord comes now. You're not going to be old like me. Awesome. Why couldn't he have come when I was 30? Yeah, some of you are happy. Anyway, we're going to heaven and it's going to be awesome. But will himself, this God of all grace, will himself personally attend to four things. He will restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. So let me give you these real quickly, what these mean. The first word, restored, simply means to put back to its original condition. And so when you go through suffering, this degrading impact, what happens is, even though there may be a physiological impact, God has power to take your soul and restore to you the vitality of your soul into its original state. This is a powerful statement that he gives. The second one is not only restore, but he will confirm. And the word confirm probably is a little bit elusive because in the original language, which was Koine Greek, that this was written in, Peter wrote this word that means to redirect. It literally means to restore the right direction. You ever been going in the wrong way? And somebody goes, you need to go that way? Like my wife when I'm driving all the time. Don't even get me started. But anyway, and you get redirected. What God does, he not only restores you to original state, but then he redirects you. And think about this. Let's go back to the riptide that you're all in during this message, and you're swimming with all your might, and you see you want help, and you're looking to the lifeguard stand, and the lifeguard is sitting on a stand, and you're like, finally he jumps off and go, okay, I'm going to get some help. And he walks to the shore with his nice tan. And he stands there and like, he's got a rescue can or rescue buoy wrapped around his shoulder and like, come on, jump, brother. I need rescue. And he's just standing there. And he puts up a bullhorn and he presses the button. You are in a riptide. Swim parallel to the shore. And you're like, parallel? What is parallel? I don't even know. You're panicked. Like, is that up or down? Is that horizontal, vertical? I don't know. Parallel, what is that? I don't know. Perpendicular? You don't know because you're panicked. Like, parallel, what are you talking about? And the reason he says that is because if you redirect your energy parallel to the shore, the riptide is going out from the shore. And if you'll swim parallel, guess what will happen? You will swim out of the riptide, and then you can easily come to the shore. And so the rescue was actually something that you didn't anticipate. That may be something. And so when he says confirm, he restores you to original state, but then he confirms you, he redirects you so that you have the right direction to embrace truth, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then he strengthens you, which means he restores your energy, your personal energy. And when you are beat down by suffering, your vitality is drained from you. But God's supernatural. But I want to say it again. Will himself, the God of all grace, will himself personally intervene in your life and strengthen you, bring back vitality to you. And then number 4, he will establish you. And this word establish means he puts you on solid ground. And let's go back to the illustration of swimming. And, there's been many times I got in trouble in the water. And I finally I swim, I get to the shore. And you know how you feel when you first get to the shore? You're just like, yeah, I'm never going in there again. Next day, you're out. But anyway, right then, you're on solid ground. And God has this supernatural power, the God of all grace, and he himself will restore you to original state, redirect your life, give you new vitality, and put you on solid ground. And it's a powerful thing in the midst of all of your suffering. It's a wonderful reality that God does. But it doesn't just happen. There are 4 things that you have to do in this passage. It's your action plan for your restoration. 4 things that you have to do. See, here's the dilemma. Every one of us will suffer at some point. Some of us will go through deep suffering. Just in the last little season of time, 2 that I know of, and I don't know everything that's going on in people's lives, but 2 of our mothers lost their adult children to death. They are going through it. They are suffering. We know people who are suffering because of physical illness. We know people who are going through divorce. We know people who have serious financial problems. And some of them do so well, and you're like, what are you, crazy? Why are you doing so well? And it's something to do with that choice that you make. But listen, there's an action plan to take. And let me give you the 4 things that God gives to us. The first one is this word humble in verse 6. So we looked at verse 10, which is the result. But here's the action plan starting back in verse 6 that gets us to verse 10. So let's start it back at verse 6. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. Notice that your exaltation is subjunctive mood, which means it could happen or it couldn't happen. The only way it will happen is for us to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God. There's several things. It could be a series of messages on just that statement. But I just want to briefly share with you, when you humble yourself, you are submitting to God who created the universe, and you submit under his mighty hand. And so you're saying, here's you, and God's power is here, and you're saying, God, I am totally in submission to you. And then in the proper time, he turns that around and lifts you up. What a powerful reality, but it takes submission. Your first step is to humble yourself. Usually, we resist God in these things. Like we'd say, God, why are you allowing this to happen? We start blaming God. Not us, because we're so godly. We would never do that, right? But of course we do. We turn against God, the very source of strength. But he says he will exalt us in his time. And I think this is just a powerful reality of what he does. If you are in the ocean and you need to be lifted up, think about this. One time I was standing on the shore and watching this guy in the ocean, and I'm thinking I should go in and help him. And I noticed the lifeguard is not going in. And I'm thinking, what's he going to do? Bullhorn thing or what? And obviously he had called this in, and all of a sudden from the right comes this jet ski, boom, over the waves. And this big guy, his arms were like legs, up on here. He's huge. And he reaches down to this teenager who is just going under. And he reaches down and he grabs him underneath the arm and flips him up onto the back of his jet ski. And the guy's still flailing while he's like, hey. He's safe now, but he's like, whoa. That's what God does. He exalts us. With his mighty hand, he lifts us up at just the right time. And he is sovereign. He knows what the right time is, and you need to trust him. So you submit under his mighty hand. And then he says, casting all your cares. Second thing you have to do, casting all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. That's this myth that God doesn't care about me, that God is, an evil God who doesn't love me, and that's why he's allowed all this to happen in my life. Many of us have gone through deep, deep waters in our lives. Death of family members, financial despair, other things that create hopelessness and conflict. But he says, cast all your care, your anxiety on him. Why? Because he cares for you. This is so important to understand that your future, and by the way, anxiety never looks to the past. I'm really anxious about yesterday. Okay, dude, you are nuts. And if someone's honest, they would never say, I'm anxious about right now. Okay, no, you're right now. You're anxious for it? No, you're in it. We're always anxious for the future. It could be a few minutes in the future, or it could be a few days in the future, but we always are fearful and anxious about something that hasn't happened yet. And so we're worried about it. And he says, look, I got you. And what you need to know is, I care for you. I'm the God of all grace, and I care for you, and I have a mighty hand of power, and I will exalt you, and I care for you more than you care for yourself. And it's a powerful thing. That anxiety can be turned over to the Lord. When you're at the end of your strength and you think you can't go on anymore, God is right there to minister his strength in your life. Well, he gets into two other ones, and the first two are about focusing on God. The second two are about focusing on our enemy, our opposition. And notice what he says in verse 8, be sober-minded. The word sober-minded literally means to have clear focus. So if you were intoxicated, you're not clear thinking. If you drink too much, your focus is not going to be what it is when you're not intoxicated. So you're going to have clear thinking. And so he uses that kind of metaphorically and says, you need to be clear thinking and watchful in the situation where you're suffering. You need to be watchful. Why? Because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And now think about that. I think if we were to do a survey of how many people believe that the devil or Satan actually exists, I think today it would be a very low number. And Satan loves that, because if you don't believe he exists, you're not going to believe that there's a battle going on. And he's the deceiver. And his greatest tool, in fact, maybe his only tool, is deception. He's a liar. The Bible is very clear about the existence of a devil and what his motivation is. But we need to be watchful, because when you are suffering, Satan says things like this: you do not deserve this. God is not there. God doesn't care about you anymore. That's the kind of stuff Satan says. He says things like, nobody has ever gone through what you're going through. Nobody. He prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. The word devour, I assumed it just meant, you start tearing at your flesh. The word devour literally means to gulp down, like whole. Like you just, boom, he wants to consume you. He wants to destroy your life, not by tearing at you, but by consuming you and bringing you into his way. You can't get to the shore in your own strength, but Satan will tell you can. You can do this. Come on, do it. You can do it. You don't need God. You don't need God's help. And the very thing that you need to do is submit to God and be watchful, because notice the next point is, he said, resist him, resist Satan. Coincidentally, in verse 6, it says, humble or submit to God, and we're to resist the devil. If you get those two turned around, you're going to be in big trouble. If you resist God and submit to the devil, and let's be honest, I can't preach this way for very long, so here we're back. Think about that. And we do it all the time. We submit to a lie and we resist the truth. That's why I always get in trouble. Whenever I do that, I get in trouble. And if I could just learn to take God at his word. So we need to resist Satan, firm in your faith. That's how you do it. The way that you resist Satan is firm in your faith. By the way, if you struggle with fleshly desires, you know how to combat that? Firm in your faith. Same way, whether it's a spiritual attack from the evil one, or if it's your own flesh that says you deserve it or want it, the same way you combat that is through faith. Knowing that the same kinds of suffering, and this is key, knowing the same kind of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. In other words, Satan's saying, nobody's going through what you're going through. You do not deserve this. If God really loved you, he would have never let this happen to you. And the truth of the matter is, God says, count it all joy when you enter into suffering. Because through that suffering, it can produce. When you surrender to it, when you have the right attitude, you go into it, and the hand of God, the presence of God, will produce endurance. And when endurance has its perfect work, James 1 says, you'll be complete, lacking nothing. It's for your perfection. But we're always like, okay, I'll take perfection, just give me that, and then let's get out of this problem. That's the deal. And the fact that everybody suffers is a reality. That there are people that are suffering and you think you're going through. I witnessed to a guy the other day and he made fun of me for witnessing to him. It was an awkward situation. You ever do that? Like, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus. Yeah, okay, goofball. You know, that's what he said, goofball. That was really serious attack. That's not what he said. But anyway, and then I think, man, I'm suffering for Jesus. Oh, really? Okay, in the Middle East, Christians are dying for their faith. Yeah, okay, let's put that next to each other and go, Tim, lighten up, bro. So there's a gal in our church, beautiful couple, the Greers. And Kirsten is a sweet lady. And we asked her to share her testimony with us. And in sharing her testimony, she had to go to China. She actually just left today. And she's on the plane right now to go to China to do business there. And she recorded her testimony for us. I'd love for you to watch this. Watch this video.
When I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, a child we've been trying to conceive for a long time and just felt so blessed to be having her, went to a doctor's appointment and found out that a lump that I had originally found in my breast was cancer. You know, despite being a believer for a decade at that point, just really felt like, you know, where's God in this? And, you know, something that we'd been praying for, you know, now it was either potentially like something bad could happen to the baby or me or both. And so, you know, we did all this scrambling to find doctors and all of that, and we're really lucky and took a giant leap of faith in actually starting chemo while pregnant. I think for me, this was one of those moments where it's like do or die. It's like either, you know, you're gonna rely on God and really get closer to Him in this, or not. I did a bunch of chemo while pregnant, and then had my daughter, and she came out perfect, which was just amazing for me to see and for the world to see, because like literally from chemo, I didn't have a single hair on my head, and she came out with this beautiful head of brown hair, and just such a blessing just to hold her in my arms and just know that God had been faithful in that whole time. And you know, that our biggest prayer that we had been praying for up to that point was that she would arrive healthy and safely. And then after that, I continued to do more treatment and had surgery. And the second huge answer to prayer that I had was that my surgery actually showed something really rare, which was called a complete response to chemo. So when they did surgery, there was nothing left. And just thinking about how much closer I was to God in that storm than, you know, ever before and even after. And I mean, I think now as a cancer survivor, there's a lot of moments where I still have to, you know, trust in Him, and you have these dark moments of, you know, what if I'm not here for my family in 2-3 years? Like, what if I don't see my daughter go to kindergarten? And so you know, it's just continually having to come back and rely on Him. Like, He's been there for you, He will be there for you, and you know, he has this plan for you, and He knows the days of your life, and you know, it's your job to be there with Him, but not to, you know, figure out all the pieces and worry about it. I just am so much more trusting in Him, and I feel like I don't have to do it all on my own, and I know that He's there, and He cares so much about me and my family. I kind of feel like it's just, you know, our fallen world, like we have illness and injury and death in this world. And I think that God used that to just really build my faith and my family's faith. I would never feel like, oh, God gave me cancer, but I feel like if I was gonna have to have it, He was able to hold me in His arms throughout the whole journey and use it to really grow me and grow my faith.
Well, not everybody does as well as Kirsten in terms of how they handle it, but you have to go through a process. There's got to be an action, and the action has to be based on truth. And what we just went over was that you have to humble yourself, because people do suffer, but the truth is God exalts. The second one is you cast your care on Him. And even though this casting of your anxiety upon the Lord is counterintuitive, in fact, we want to hold on to it because we think we're managing the future with our own fear. It's a crazy thing about anxiety and fear. We think we're actually doing something to take care of the future. It's just the opposite. It's messing up our future. So the truth is, he cares for you. You have to trust him that he cares for you. Secondly, we need to be watchful. Satan is real and deceptive, and the truth of the matter is he desires to destroy us. He doesn't want us to have our joy in the Lord. And then the fourth truth that we learned, if we're going to have this successful plan for our restoration, is we need to resist. And that is, we resist Satan by faith and connecting to God. The truth of the matter is he says that we all suffer. Everyone in the brotherhood suffers. So this is just a reality. And let me just close with a final word on suffering. That he closes this section in, we looked at verses 6 through 10, but he says in verse 11, to him be dominion forever and ever. After all this discussion on suffering and spiritual attack and how to handle that, he makes a statement. It seems like, if you don't really understand what he's saying, it sounds like out of the blue. To him be dominion forever and ever. What he's saying is, I've got it. I am sovereign. I'm in control. And I have my mighty hand. I care for you. All I'm asking is that you do these four things, and I will act in your behalf and for your benefit. God's ultimate sovereign authority is what we live for. We don't live for our gratification. We live for the glorification of God. He is sovereign. He deserves our respect, our adoration, and our worship. And we need to trust him even when we suffer. Let's bow our heads together in prayer.